Go.
You started?
Yeah.
You started?
Yeah, we can cut the front, dude. Don't worry.
Give me a countdown.
There you go. You good? No, I can't touch it. It's good. You can just cut it. So go
Alright,
ahead.
hi, my name is Mcculoughs, and today I'm giving my TED Talk on natural selection. And I actually learned about this topic in biology, and it was one of the few topics that interested me enough to do a project on, so yeah, that's what we're talking about today. The investigative question for this presentation is, how does the allele frequency of a gene pool change when an organism experiences natural selection? So that's what we're talking about today. And natural selection is basically a process of evolution where animals that have favorable traits use these traits to survive, and in turn they pass them on to their offspring. So the whole gene pool in an environment becomes like the organism with the favorable traits. So eventually, over time, the whole gene pool, the whole population of that environment with that species should have the same traits. And the animals that don't, they will eventually die out. And there's 4 steps in natural selection, and the first one is overproduction. So that means that more organisms are produced than can survive. The second step is genetic variation. Unfortunately, not everything's the same, so some organisms have traits that are better, and some organisms have traits that are worse, just like us and people. There's a little bit of uniqueness. And these mutations are caused by variations in DNA. Step number 3 is the struggle to survive. This is basically where, like I said, the organisms without the favored traits, it's basically where they die out, and then the organisms with the favorable traits continue to live. And the 4th and final step of natural selection is successful reproduction. Basically, the animals, or the organisms with the traits that are selected for, pass their traits that are selected for onto their offspring. So their offspring has the same traits that they have, which means they're favored to survive in their environment. And then an example of this is the giraffe. I know a lot of you probably think that the giraffe was always a long-legged, or long-necked creature, but the truth is it wasn't. The reason the giraffe has a long neck is because it had to reach for its leaves at the top of a tree. So eventually, the giraffes that couldn't reach their neck out to the top of the tree would die, and the ones that could would survive. And then there's a picture here of these giraffes at the start of time, and eventually they've got that long neck, which they now have, and that's a result of natural selection. Another result is the peppered moth. We looked at this in class, and basically what happened is the Industrial Revolution took place in Great Britain. The trees changed from light bark to dark bark because of the pollution from the Industrial Revolution, and the peppered moths that were originally dark against the light bark were selected against because their traits didn't help them survive in their environment, so they would die out. And then as the trees got darker, many of the peppered moths got darker because the light ones would die out, and the dark ones would have their offspring, and they would become dark. So gradually over time, the whole peppered moth population would become darker colored to blend in with the darker colored tree branches. And anyway, this is basically a graph of 15 years. As you can see here, we see when the trees were lighter colored, there was about 525 light-colored moths. And then over a gradual 5-year period, you can see that the light-colored moths goes down to about, 50 or so. 50 or so moths, and then the dark colored moths expand as the as time passes, as the trees start to get darker. So, and then to conclude this presentation, I found that the allele frequency of organisms that experience natural selection will consist of homozygous combinations of the genetic traits that are selected for in that gene pool. So basically that means that the majority of organisms that survive when they go through natural selection, they all have usually a dominant trait that allows them to survive what's selected for. And the organisms that don't will either emigrate into a new environment or they'll just die out. And then my research shows this with the peppered moths, because the peppered moths became darker, and over time a lot of the peppered moth population became darker colored. So they had a dominant trait, and it was passed on to their offspring, so eventually they'd have the same dominant trait. And that's all for today's TED Talk. I hope you enjoyed, and I was a little bit nervous, but I got this out of the way, so I'm happy now. So thanks for watching.